Hi everybody, thank you for joining me today on Christine's Awesome Things. My name is Christine and today we're going to talk about our tomato plants. Right after Mother's Day, I planted my tomato plants outdoors. As you can see, it's been 1 month and my tomato plants are already starting to bloom. These little blooms right here that you see will become tomatoes. These are indeterminate plants. Indeterminate plants can get up to 10 feet tall. That's why I have this long support pole. Now, when you're planting your tomatoes, once they get this high, between 12 and 18 inches, you definitely want to put some type of support around it. Because these are indeterminate plants, I put a support pole and a cage. And I also secure them with ties so that they don't lean over. When you're dealing with tomato plants, there's 2 types, indeterminate and determinate. Determinate plants, you don't want to trim. Indeterminate plants you want to trim because they spread and they get very tall. The more they spread, the taller they get. The energy is going to transfer into the leaves and stems. You want it to transfer into your fruits. So when you have indeterminate plants, you definitely want to consider trimming them. Otherwise, you're going to have excess leaves and stems that are not going to produce fruit, and all that energy needed for the fruit will go into the leaves. Another thing you want to do is you want to look for suckers on your plants. Suckers would be an ample word because they suck the life out of your plants. If you look closely right here, this little leaf right here growing in between this tomato plant is a sucker. This sucker will grow a whole new branch. You don't want that. When these suckers grow and the branch grow, they take energy from your plant, making your fruit smaller. And sometimes if you allow it to grow too much, you won't get fruit at all. If you allow them to grow and then break it off, you're going to damage your plant. It's going to leave a mark, look like a hole, and it is a possibility that it could rot. Now, over here, you see that these are also getting flowers, which will bear fruit. So when you're going, here's another sucker right here. By the way, with indeterminate plants, you might want to consider getting a strong cage. This right here is actually cow fencing. It was cut and made into a cage. If you get the ones, the little flimsy $2 ones at the market, they don't really hold indeterminate plants once they become big. They tend to, once you plant fruit, it tends to flop over. Oh, nice little spider right there. As you can see right here, this right here is going to need support because it's leaning over that way. So I am going to add a support here so that this will grow straight. Now when I planted these tomato plants, I made sure that I took off the bottom leaves and planted it deep. That way it would be stronger. If you notice with your tomato plants, if you feel the main stem, there's little fuzzy hair follicles that I refer to them as. If you plant your stem into the ground and you plant it deep, they will actually produce roots. That little fuzz you feel on your stem will actually produce roots, and those roots will go into the ground and bring energy into your plant. That's why we prefer you to plant them deep. All these are tomato plants. Over here you can see, again, this one is about to flower as well. Make sure that every few days you're checking for suckers on your plants and you pull them off because it's going to suck the energy out of your tomatoes. Another thing you want to do is every 2 weeks you want to give your plants some type of fertilizer. I recommend 10-10-10. Tomato plants love nitrogen and phosphorus. It makes the fruits bigger. You want to make sure you do that every 2 weeks. That way you know your plants are getting the nutrients that they need. But you also want to make sure you're not overwatering, because overwatering your plant will cause your plants to have yellow leaves. And you want to try to get a drip hose instead of an overhead sprinkler. That will cause your plants to mold, get yellow and brown spots on it. If you have nothing but an overhead sprinkler, make sure that you're watering your plants early in the day. That way the sun has time to dry out your leaves. Otherwise, if your leaves are wet, they will get mold, brown spots, diseases on them. Okay? Tips from Christine of Christine Awesome Things. These were very, very tall. They were way up here, so I topped them off at the lowest flower that's growing on my tomato plant. These flowers that you see will become tomatoes. So the ones that I saw that were further down, I topped them off and cut them at an angle. It's best to cut them at an angle, so if you have rain or they get wet, or if it's any morning dew, it'll slide off rather than just sit on top of them and cause them to have any type of disease or rot or anything. Now, as you can see, I have an explosion of tomatoes that are growing on here, okay? And this is just one of the plants. This one is a indeterminate plants. All my plants are indeterminate plants. These ones here are Roma tomatoes, and as you can see, explosion of tomatoes. I topped them all off. Here's another example of the tomatoes plants that have been topped. Again, I cut them off right here at the lowest one where there were flowers. That way it'll put energy into the tomato plants. These are Roma. I have Big Boy, I have beefsteak, and these down here that I have growing. This particular one here is a brandywine. Okay? So I have brandywine, beefsteak, and big boy tomatoes. And all of them have been topped to put energy into the plants. Now, another thing you want to remember about growing tomato plants is that when you first plant them, you need to provide nutrients. But you also need to provide nutrients during the growing season. At least twice during your growing season after the first initial feeding, when you first put your tomato plants into the ground. If you watch my other videos, you see that I use my own mix of plant food. So if you want to go back and watch that, you'll see what I did when I first started planting my tomato plants. Over here is another example of my tomato plants and how huge they get. And they're still green, and my tomato plants still have a lot of flowers growing on them. There's a lot of tomatoes growing on them. They're going to be really, really heavy plants. Again, it's all about them having the sunlight they need, the nutrients that they need, and the feedings that they need. One of the things that happened during the growth process is that we had gotten a lot of rain, so that prevented me from having to water them. But the trick was, when it was time, when I knew the rain was coming, I put down a feeding for the plants. So I put them right into the ground by the roots of the plants. I dug a little hole by the main stem and put plant food down there. That way, when it rained, it would automatically get the nutrients that it needed, because I knew we were going to get a lot of rain. So it caused this huge explosion of tomatoes to grow. So again, indeterminate plants, you may want to consider topping them. They get anywhere between 7 and 10 feet tall, but that height will take away from your tomato plants. They'll be smaller. So if you want to top them, it'll put more energy into actually growing the tomatoes rather than growing stem and leaves. This is Christine of Christine Awesome Things. Like and subscribe.